Hey guys, Maniac here with GameAccess.net doing our second official podcast. It's just me all by myself today. Unfortunately, Discreater 117 is not with me. The reason why is because that I'm talking about a topic that unfortunately he's just not familiar with. We're doing a different topic today. Today we're going to be talking about my absolute favorite Metal Gear Solid memories. And the reason why I wanted to talk about these was because, well, next to Halo, probably Metal Gear Solid is another one of those big franchises that actually, over the course of the last 10 years, 11 years, have impacted me the most personally, or has had a lot to do with my life. So I wanted to talk about that one next. Also, given the fact that Metal Gear Solid HD Collection just came out earlier this week, I did pick up a copy and did an unboxing, which did very well on YouTube. Well, at least did very well in comparison to some of my other videos that I posted up recently. And I wanted to talk about it. So, I guess my earliest memories about Metal Gear Solid was probably have to do with one of the first commercials I ever saw for the game itself. A long time ago, there was this commercial. I'm sure if you look it up on YouTube or something, or if you try looking for it in various file hosting sites, you might be able to find a video clip of it. And that is of the Metal Gear Solid original TV commercial. And it was of a bunch of U.S. Army guys, and two of them are supervising one guy who's going through all these difficult tasks, and he's being told in this voiceover that he's got to be at top physical strength and all this other stuff. And he's doing simple things like rubbing his tummy while patting the top of his head, or standing on one foot, or putting simple blocks into simple holes. Finally, one supervisor says to the other one after they pass the guy, "Aren't these tests really easy?" And he says, "Suicide mission." And the guy just shakes his head, oh. And that's when it got me really intrigued about Metal Gear Solid. By this point also, I didn't have a PlayStation at the time. I was a very PC-oriented person at the time. I only played PC games, and I would continue to play mostly PC games at the time. But my cousin had just gotten a PlayStation 1. And with this PlayStation 1, he had gotten a PlayStation demo disc. At the time, because there was no internet, PlayStations really didn't come out of the box with internet connections or anything like that. You basically couldn't download demos. What you had to do was, if they wanted to distribute demos in any way, there would only be like two ways you could get them, at least for consoles. For PC, you could download them, no problem. One was you could download the PC games. You could get a sampler disc, which shipped with the PlayStations, and which we bundled with the PlayStation. So if you open up a brand new PlayStation, you get a sampler disc with it of all the most recent games. The other way is that PlayStation actually had a magazine at the time, which was actually a digital magazine, which predated the times of DVDs. Some of them were pretty funny, and had demos on them of various recent games. I remember anything from like Spyro the Dragon to Crash Bandicoot Warped and stuff like that. Well, one of the games on the demo discs that my cousin got was the demo for Metal Gear Solid. And here I am, it's like, oh, we got to try that. The commercial was really good. And we tried it, and it was not what I was expecting, but what I saw was damn good. I don't know if any of you have actually played the Metal Gear Solid demo, but it's pretty much the opening act of Metal Gear Solid up until right after finding the DARPA chief. So it's a pretty engrossing game. Very early on. It hooked you really early on. And I was hooked. I'm like, you got to get this game, man. I told my cousin, it's like, you got to get this. We got to play this. Because this demo is really good. And if this is just the demo, imagine how good the rest of the game is going to be. I asked for a PlayStation of my own for my birthday later on. By that point, my cousin did in fact get a copy of the game of his own. And I remember playing through certain segments of it with him. And by that point, I was also checking out on the internet pretty much daily. My school at the time had a high-speed... My school at the time was pretty top of the line. And it still is in a lot of respects. I haven't been there in a couple of years, of course. But I used to visit occasionally. We used to have way back when, those computers were like Pentium 2s, 266s, megahertz and stuff like that, which at the time was pretty top of the line. This was 1998, 1999. 266 megahertz was pretty It was mid-range, but it could handle whatever you threw at it, even games. And I remember way back when, a lot of the kids would basically just be spending the time playing Grand Theft Auto 2 demos on them. As well as pretty much, because it could run everything. Nowadays, that doesn't happen. If you buy even if you buy some mid-range computers, you still probably won't be able to play games on it if it's got Intel Extreme graphics. They pretty much ruin the whole thing for that. But to fast forward the story up a bit, we'd always have, spare time, and we'd spend them on the computers doing, looking up news on the internet and stuff like that. Some of the times the kids would be looking up cheat codes or tips to get through stuff, because that was just the time when a lot of those sites were just gaining in popularity. I remember cheatcc.com being pretty popular back then. And I remember hearing about all the tips and all the tricks and all the Easter eggs for how to beat the game. But I didn't have a copy of my own, which was disappointing. We were even trading gossip with some of my other friends who had played the game, and we were talking about things like, oh, I hear you can get the ninja suit, and we hear you can become invisible, or have infinite ammo, or do this during this sequence, it'll do that, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. But it was fun to talk about, because it was definitely an engrossing game that really opened a lot of avenues for political discussion, technological discussion, story discussion. Story discussion had never been talked about in games before. Not really. I mean, before that, you'd had games like Duke Nukem or 3D or Quake or Doom or even Wolfenstein, where a story was one page and it was just a synopsis about why you're there in the first place. Here's a gun, kill everything, make it through the end of the level, and progress until there's no more levels. And maybe occasionally you might meet a final boss, but you'll never know their intentions. They're just there because you're trying to do something. You're trying to kill everybody. Not with Metal Gear. Metal Gear opened up a whole new idea for what military-industrial complex was going to be, where we were going as a human race in 5 years. Concepts about things like gene therapy and nanomachines and, well, obviously nuclear-equipped walking battle tanks, to be perfectly honest, but the technology that it used was very interesting, and the characters were very engrossing. Otacon is probably one of my favorite characters of all time in any game ever. I loved him. He was so cool. I mean, he was a total wimp, but some of the best scenes in the first game were all his scenes. Or all the scenes with him in them, talking to Snake. So, I had to have this game. So for my birthday, the year or the next year might have been 1999 or so, I asked for my own PlayStation, and I got a PlayStation. By that point, the Dreamcast wasn't yet out, but people were talking about it coming out. I believe it would come out. Yeah, it was going to come out in September. So the prices were low for a PlayStation 1 at the time. I think you could probably get one for like $125, $150 at the most. And memory cards, of course, peripherals. I just, all I told my folks is I just needed to get a PlayStation and a memory card. That's all I needed. At least that's all I felt I needed. And it turned out to be that was pretty much all I needed. But I didn't ask for a copy of the game because I knew the game was going to be expensive, so I wanted to get the game with my birthday money. Well, finding the game was very difficult. Every store I checked, and by this point, this was back when this was back before the days of Best Buy or EB Games was called Electronics Boutique at the time, and they weren't bought out by GameStops. GameStops were pretty much Funko-Lands at the time. Of course, this was back before they absorbed Funko-Land. We didn't really have... There were no dedicated game stores that sold new games, basically. At least not as far as I can recall at that time. There probably were, but they were not in my area. If you wanted a video game, and if you wanted to buy a video game, there were only about 2 or 3 avenues you had. There was no Best Buy back then. The only places you could really get it was at maybe a Circuit City. By this point, Lechmere had shut down. So there was no more Lechmere. Trust me, I would have bought it at Lechmere if I could have. But I believe that it shut down 2 years prior. So all we had were Circuit Cities, which are now defunct. Trust me, they deserved it. Which didn't have the game. Or you had places like Kmart. This was before Walmart. Walmart was not in my area at the time. You had places like Kmart that would be mostly clothing stores and maybe food stores, but mostly clothing stores that sold toys, and if you were lucky, maybe electronics in a small area. if you were lucky, you might be able to find a game you wanted to play there next to the VHS tapes or something like that. And that was really the only avenues we had. There weren't any dedicated game stores at that point. So me finding a game on the shelves, a copy of the game on the shelves, was like near impossible. So I remember talking to one of my friends, talking about my problem. I couldn't find a copy of the game anywhere. And on top of that, my version of the PlayStation that I had gotten for my birthday did not include the demo. They included a new sampler disc, which didn't have the Metal Gear demo. So I kind of felt a little bummed out by that. But I had a friend at the time that was telling me, just give me the money and I know I have a store that's selling it. They're still selling it. I'll just pick it up. You just give me the money and I'll sell it to you. And I thought, wow, that's really nice of you. And true to his word, I gave him $53. You know, I gave him like $50. He got it. This next day in school, he got it for me. And I'd be like so grateful. But that weekend, I was going to be going for wilderness survival training, and I had known about that in advance. And that whole weekend, starting with Friday, I knew that was a Thursday. That whole weekend, I knew I wasn't going to have any opportunity to play the game at all. So I figured I had to play the game as much as humanly possible between the time I got home from school and the time I passed out that night. And true to my word, my intention was in the first playthrough I was going to try to get the stealth camo. So I wanted to get the bad ending, so I was going for that. And I played through as much as I possibly could in one day. And that was up to the second sniper wolf fight. That's where I paused. And that's where I saved the game. That's where I left it. That rest of that weekend, I was just, oh my God, man. Imagine picking up a book and reading it, or reading half of it. And you're so engrossed by the story. But then you lose the book. Or you don't have the opportunity to finish it. Or imagine watching half a movie. And then you have to do something and the movie's not on anymore. What do? You got to know how it ends. That's how it was for me for 3 days. Trust me, it was pure torture. I couldn't focus on anything that whole weekend. Because all I wanted to do was get back to playing my Metal Gear Solid. Meanwhile, the stuff I was actually doing in the wilderness survival training was pretty much the stuff I was doing in the game, like rappelling down stuff. In this case, in the game, he was rappelling down buildings. I was rappelling down mountains, or climbing trees and eating K rations and stuff like that, and other food, like trail mix and stuff like that. Learned how to eat a whole apple stem. You can eat the core. You can eat the core and seeds. That's all edible. Just the stem. Don't even bother with the stem. But you can eat an apple's core and apple seeds. That's perfectly edible. Learned how to do all that. Learned how to do zip lines and all this high tension wire and everything else. All kinds of cool stuff. Lived outside. Ate all kinds of different cool food. Learned how to, basically I learned how to survive in the woods. At least with modern equipment and stuff like that, modern survival equipment. By that Sunday when I got home, all I wanted to do, I didn't even give a shit about my homework. I don't even know couldn't even remember if I had any in the first place. All I wanted to do was go back to that game. That's all I wanted to do. And I knew I had to go back to school on Monday, of course, but that was all I was going to do. Was that Sunday I was going to play that game. And sure enough, I played through the end, and I was just wowed by the ending. I thought it was probably one of the best endings ever. Even the bad ending was good. The ending with Otacon was just great. I liked it a lot. I thought it was a really great moment. I thought the whole concept behind the Metal Gear, the whole concept behind Nano Machines, all fantastic stuff. I was gripped. I wanted more. I think everybody else wanted more too, especially the people in the United States. I think we really all wanted more. That game did very well here. At least the first game did really well here, Even at the time, it did really well. I wanted more. I wanted to play more. So I remember one of the websites I used to visit a long time ago was this website called MetalGearSolid.net, which was a fan site. It later the guy got hosted by GameSpy. I don't know what he did now. There is, I think, a Metal Gear Solid Net right now, or at least a derivative of that. But it's not. I don't think it's operated by the same person. It's operated by somebody else now. It's a different kind of site, so I don't know what's going on. That having been said, it wasn't my favorite site at the time because this guy would be posting up the latest news. He was posting up all the information, the cheat codes and tips and strategies for beating various bosses and strategies for making Easter eggs happen. It's just various stuff. There's a lot of cool stuff for a linear game. There was a lot of cool stuff you could look for and do. So I specifically remembered. I just around the time of Christmas, Metal Gear Solid VR missions coming out, and this was released as Metal Gear Solid Integral in Japan. The VR missions were bundled with the game itself. That didn't happen in the United States. They just included the VR missions discs in the United States, which was kind of disappointing. But it was I think it was at a reduced price. It wasn't at a full price. So I remember if you completed all the VR missions, and I believe at the time that was 300. There were 300 VR missions. Metal Gear Solid 2 played on that a lot, actually. Metal Gear Solid 2 did actually play into the fact that the VR missions were canonical. That it had also played those VR missions. Even the initial release of Metal Gear Solid, because the original release of Metal Gear Solid 2 didn't have any VR missions at all. It wasn't until the Substance version came out, and they were included with the HD version as well. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to what was going on. If you completed all the VR missions on the VR missions disc, you unlocked some of these special videos and stuff like that, all cool stuff, like the TGS video and the E3 video and everything else. But they also had, at the very end, an image. A really suspicious image. Looked like a Metal Gear, but it didn't look like Rex, which was the Metal Gear 1 game, Metal Gear. So I thought, whoa, what's going on here? What's this? And Metal Gear Net, of course, immediately put a screenshot up of that. I thought that was pretty cool. It's like, what's this? We don't know. So everybody's having tidbits about this, especially given the fact of what was going on at the very end of the end conversation after the credits of the first game. People were talking about it. It's like, is there going to be a Metal Gear Solid 2? Everybody wanted a Metal Gear Solid 2. And I specifically remember at the time that the guy was talking, this was, I think, probably just before April or something like that, maybe May, that E3 was coming up. I didn't know what E3 was at the time. And there might have been something going on for E3. By that point, though, everybody knew that the PlayStation 2 had already been announced, so everybody knew there was going to be a PlayStation 2. But it wasn't out yet. And nobody, of course, had one, at least not in the United States. I think it might have come up I think it might have been released in Japan a few months earlier or something. I don't remember. I can't remember when the PlayStation 2 came out in Japan. But I'm pretty certain by that point, nobody in the United States except for importers had PlayStation 2s. They were going to get ones, but they didn't have it wasn't released yet. So everybody was fairly certain if there was going to be a Metal Gear Solid 2, it was going to be for the PlayStation 2. And eyes were looking at E3 2000, which was going to be in May of that year in Los Angeles, that there was going to be something going on. Well, the day of E3, I was in my English class again, same thing, I had the computers, trust me. And by the way though, there were computer labs in my school, but even regular classrooms had at least 2 or 3 computers at least. So I was actually pretty spoiled. This was back in the day before high-tech classrooms. There weren't really high-tech classrooms, but if I could imagine that there would be high-tech classrooms in that school now, there probably would be, because I remember by my senior year, I convinced one of my classes, which was a business class, to buy a projector. We thought it would be a good idea, and they went with it. They actually got an approval. We got the funds. We've got a projector. So this was way back before high-tech classrooms were going on, but it was a new school at the time, and we got the computers. We had all the grants, and we were pretty spoiled, and I was very lucky. I loved my high school experience. My high school was very good to me. I was very lucky, and this was a public school, too. So I got to be grateful for that. If I had to break down what my high school experience was, this is just one story out of a million I could tell you of why my high school experience was so good. And granted, this one doesn't have anything to do with education per se, but I have plenty of also other ones that do, and they're not important for this podcast. So the first day of E3 that year, 2000, it was May, I think it was like May 16th or something like that. It was a Friday. And this was back when they actually thought, why don't we have these things on Fridays, and Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays? I wish the E3 organizers would go back to that, make my life a lot easier, make a lot of people's lives easier, and would make LA traffic's lives a lot easier. But I digress. What happened was that I hadn't been a fan of IGN.com, but I had heard of it at the time, and I thought, maybe there might be some information on IGN.com, see what's going on there. because if there's going to be some kind of Metal Gear information, it might be video, it might be a news article, I don't know. Let me check a site that might be up to the minute, basically. So during the middle of English class, and I had plenty of friends in English class. In that English class, basically, it was a really nice teacher. She'd have us write stuff. She'd have us read books, and so she assigned work in class. But we loved her because she never assigned us homework, which was fantastic and a lot of fun. She also never assigned us really lengthy assignments. She had us reading a lot. We did a lot of reading. But we had a library, so we didn't exactly have a less supply of books. Basically, we had plenty of books we could read, and if we didn't have a book, we could just go to the library, pick one up, and read it. That sort of thing. So it wasn't really a major. It was a really good time. I had finished my assignment, and I wanted to check to see if there was any news. And the first thing I saw was Metal Gear Solid 2 announced video here. I'm like, no freaking way. I clicked on the link, and this was like I said, the second I looked up the site for the first time. I'm like, maybe there might be some Metal Gear news, and it's like, yeah, there was Metal Gear news. This was in like 1 o'clock local time too, so it must have just happened. And I'm like, oh god, I wonder what this Metal Gear 2 game is going to be. I wonder what's going to be, and I hope Snake and Otacon are in it. I hope, it's like it was some of the earlier Metal Gear games which were on the MSX. There were probably they didn't really carry over new characters and everything else. I hope they carry over some of the characters that were famous in the first game. Yeah, they did. Anybody that's played the second game and the first game knows that they carried over pretty much everybody, which was great. That's what we wanted. First line, it was actually, there were no speakers on any of those computers for obvious reasons. They didn't want to make any noise. They had sound cards, and they worked with headphones, but we didn't have any at the time. But what they did have were, because it was in the original recorded in Japanese, it was recorded in the original Japanese, it was subtitled, which was perfect, absolutely perfect. That video took forever to load. Even on a high-speed T1 network, that video took forever to load. It must have been several hundred megabytes in QuickTime. But we waited, and we saw it. And if I had to put a list of like some of the best trailers ever made, that would be one of them. That would certainly be in my top 10. I don't know if it would be number 1. But that would certainly be in my top 10, absolutely. Certainly, absolutely be in my top 10. That was probably one of the best teasers. Granted, it showed gameplay, it showed story. It didn't show a lot of either. But it showed some of the new gameplay mechanics, like the tranquilizer gun, and you actually notice in that trailer, and they don't really make a habit of it in the game, but you can see Snake occasionally chewing. And that's because apparently they had admitted that he does chew gum. So I thought that was kind of cool, and it works. It was like probably one of the best days of my life. Later on in that day, I was going to go to the movies to go see Road Trip. I was underage at the time. I got in anyway because I lied to the people that were selling the tickets. Got my friend and I in. Or if I remember correctly, actually, now that I think about it, I think actually my dad bought us the tickets. Now that I remember it, I'm sorry, I take it back. My dad bought us. My dad had bought my friend and I the. He had come in and he had bought us the tickets in advance or something along those lines, and so they let us in based upon that. I think my dad didn't come in the movie with us, but I mean he did buy me my movie ticket. So I think that's what happened if I remember correctly. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that happened. So I got to see boobies that day. I got to know that that my favorite game was going to be getting a sequel. That was a good day. That was probably, at the time, my favorite day of all time at that time. It's since been eclipsed. I mean, I think 2003's E3, which was the first E3 I ever attended, later one-upped that, and for reasons that I will not go into because it is nobody's business. But that was probably, at the time, that was probably one of my favorite days. So fast forward, the PlayStation 2 comes out later on in the year. It comes out, I believe, in November of 2000 in the United States. Sells out immediately. Nobody has them. Nobody got one. Actually, no, I take it back. The people that got one, but trust me, there was plenty who didn't. And there were plenty that wanted them that didn't. I sold my PlayStation at the time. I had a friend that wanted he had a PlayStation 2, I think. And or he was planning on getting a PlayStation 2, but his PlayStation 1 was broken, and it wasn't reading PlayStation 1s properly. So he wanted to buy mine because mine was in perfect condition. So I sold him mine for like, I think it was like 60. I think I sold him for like $60, which was, I thought, a fair price. But there were two things I told him he was not going to get, and it was just a sale of the PlayStation. I sold him the car. Of course, I got him the AC adapter and the cables, and I even had like an extra VHF cable, which would have worked for older cable TV televisions. But there were two things I told him he wouldn't have and he couldn't have from me. One was he couldn't have my memory card. That I was keeping no matter what. Because I knew that that data was going to be staying intact, and I knew that if I ever got a PlayStation 2, I was going to be using the memory card for that. And the other thing was I was keeping all the games. It's like my copies of Metal Gear, my copies of Metal Gear VR missions. You can't have any of those, I said, because I got them. They're mine. And he said, he said he was fine with that. Well, I never got a PS2 that year because nobody did. And actually, it would be a couple more years before I did actually get a PlayStation 2. But in November 2001, Metal Gear Solid 2 did come out. And my cousin got a copy of it, just like he did for Metal Gear 1. And I ended up playing the whole game pretty much over at his place. That was probably that game. I loved that game. That was a great game. I really did love that game a lot. I won't go too much into the story about it because I kind of went a bit too much into Metal Gear 1. But needless to say, I did think of it as very much a part 2 or an act 2 of an extension of the game, of the first game. I really liked it a lot. I thought the graphics were beautiful. I thought the story was, again, fantastic. I know a lot of people complain about the story. I like the story. I like the new gameplay mechanics. I thought they were very good. They really improved upon the Metal Gear Solid 1 model. I really liked it a lot. I thought it was a lot of fun. But I didn't have a copy of my own. I never got a copy of my own until much, much, much later. Okay, I'm about to get a little controversial here for just a second. If this doesn't seem to be your cup of tea, I advise you just to turn off the tape right now. Because I'm just going to talk about something that had happened just around the time of the release of Metal Gear Solid 2. And it's probably it might offend somebody. I don't, that's not my intention. I just wanted to say how I reacted to this happening. And I just wanted to give my feelings about it. But I want to forward this by saying, I don't wish, this was 10 years ago, I don't wish harm on anyone. I don't hold anyone responsible for doing this. I don't feel bad about it. I just think that what they did was the wrong decision. About 10 years ago, like I said, I was still in high school when the Metal Gear Solid 2 had come out. This was 1 month before Christmas. It came out in November 2001. Back when I was in high school, we basically could read newspapers. I mean, they would have a pretty good supply of newspapers for all of us. And if we had an off time, or we could just like go through the news, and I loved reading. Oh God, I loved reading the newspapers because you get to read the opinion sections. Most people would just read the horoscopes, especially the girls would read the horoscopes. That's all they'd be interested in. But most of my peers would just be interested in like the sports section. But I happen to really like the world news and the local news, and I liked reading the opinion sections and stuff like that. So one day, just before one of the last days, I think it was just before Thanksgiving, I was reading a newspaper article that, and I just thought to myself, why did they write this? Why is this? Why am I reading this? Why did somebody put this in the newspaper? And it's because it wasn't news. It wasn't news at all. It was just literally a transcribed statement from our local politicians. There was no news at all. And I'll tell you what it was. Like I said, Metal Gear Solid 2, when it came out, was released in probably the worst time possible. A game like that could have been released. It was released 2 months after September 11th. Now, because of that, and the game taking place in New York and everything else, the game had to be seriously cut, like very cut. The game was originally scripted to have an entire ending to it that was not in the final version of the game, and it has not been returned to the final version of the game, that most people have never seen. Now, I'm going to give a little spoiler for a second. If just close your ears if you don't want to hear that. At the very end of the of Metal Gear Solid 2, towards the very end, it's basically you're on top of Arsenal Gear. It's Raiden and the head terrorist Solid Snake. All right, they're talking. Arsenal Gear goes haywire, and it basically sails into New York City. Then all of a sudden it fades to white, and then Arsenal Gear is apparently run aground. It's crashed into Federal Hall, which we didn't see. And Arsenal and Solidus and Raiden are knocked on top of the building. Now, if you played that scene initially like I did, you probably would have thought, did I hit the X button by accident? Something seems like it's missing here. Did I miss something here? And the truth is, I did. We all did. But it wasn't our fault. You see, what was originally scripted to happen, at least according to some of the research that I've done about the game, was that apparently Arsenal Gear was supposed to have attacked New York. You were supposed to see it displace the Statue of Liberty, and it was supposed to crash right into, run aground into Wall Street and crash right into. We were supposed to see all that. Well, we didn't see all that. Because September 11th happened, and they needed to make, basically the Kojima team needed to make the game's release in November 2001, hell or high water. They didn't have time to write or create a new ending. They just didn't. So what they did instead was they chopped out all that. They also removed the American flags from the flagpoles in Wall Street. Originally, as you saw in the script, in the final version, after you kill Solidus, Raiden raises and lowers his sword for some reason. That's because he was originally supposed to be chopping down the American flag that was over there. There's an American flag on top of Federal Hall. He was supposed to chop that down, and it was supposed to fall onto his body after he fell onto the steps right behind the statue of George Washington. That's all. That was all cut. We never saw any of that. I pleaded with Kojima team. I tweeted to Hideo Kojima, please, can you, for the HD release, can you please put those scenes back in the movie? It's been, back in the game. It's been 10 years. Please put them back. Well, I hate to break it to everybody, but in case you don't know this, no, the game, they did not restore any of it. The game is just as it was. Everything completely censored. Still, 10 years after the fact. Which is extremely sad and unfortunate. So, fast forward, rewind a little bit more to just before the holiday season started in my local area. I'm reading this article in the newspaper, which was literally not a news article at all, but it was literally a little blurb, which was made into a paragraph in I think it was the local section of my newspaper, from some of my local politicians saying that don't buy these games for Christmas. And it was a list of games. One of them was Metal Gear Solid 2. I honestly don't remember what some of the other ones were, but you know what? It was, like I said, it was 2001, so you could probably make your pick of what the violent games were of that time. And their reasoning was that because this was 2 months after September 11th, that we had seen enough tragedy. And I'm just thinking, wow. Wow. Now, at the time, there was a lot of good stuff going on. This was 10 years ago, but I'm sure many people remember. At the time, there was a lot of talk going on about why we were attacked and what was the ideology of the people that attacked us, what was their reasoning. And the common plug line was that they hated us for our freedom. That was our big line. And when you think about it like that, at its base core, there were a few kernels of truth to that statement. We do live in a free society. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of peaceably assemble. We have freedom of worship. All wonderful, all wonderful things. Absolutely wonderful. And one of the reasons why they were saying one of the reasons we were attacked was because we lived in a free society. So you're telling me, in the one breath, that we're free. But then you're saying in the next breath, or possibly even in the same breath, depending on how fast you talk, don't buy these games. But we live in a free society. Why can't I exercise my freedom to buy the games I want to purchase for Christmas? I'll wait for an answer. And I thought it was... Now, like I said, people can make their comments all they want. People can have all their opinions that they want. I'm even my politicians are entitled to all of their own opinions, and they're certainly entitled to make whatever decisions that they want based upon their opinions or based upon the opinions of their constituents. I understand all of that. I completely understand all of it. But why was that an article in my local newspaper? I have no idea. It served no purpose whatsoever except to tell me what games I could buy myself for Christmas. But tell me, and told a lot of people, and it probably made a few kids upset because, for all I know, there were probably some kids that asked for those games, which were completely legitimately able to buy to get them, or would have gotten them, had some of their parents not read that article. I gotta say, there's probably gonna be a bunch of disappointed. There was probably a bunch of disappointed kids that Christmas who didn't get their copies of Metal Gear Solid or maybe Halo. I don't remember what the list. I know there was a list. I know Metal Gear wasn't singled out, but it was on. It was the only one I can remember that was on the list. And again, this was like 10 years ago. This was just after national tragedy, so I totally can take it with a grain of salt. But given the fact of how much time has passed since then, I really was kind of hoping that they would have restored the game after 10 years, but they haven't. Okay, so after all of that unnecessary controversy, let's move on just a little bit, shall we? Well, Metal Gear Solid 3 was first announced in 2003. And they were talking about things. This was like kind of almost like a relaunching of the series, or at the very least, it looked like they were certainly taking the series into a whole new direction. I didn't really know how I felt about that. I mean, it was obvious that they were, they were focusing on the fact that, they had brought in Raiden for the second game, which actually didn't really offend as many people that I had known. Especially, I had a friend my friend Twitch was a diehard, he still is a diehard Raiden loyalist, but he was telling, basically that they wanted to focus on Snake again. They wanted to bring back Snake. They wanted to have you play a Snake. Well, how could you play a Snake in the 70s? Wouldn't he have been very, 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 very young at that time, or not even born yet? It's like, are we going to play Snake as a fetus? But no, it was fully grown. So we obviously know what happened. They did explain it, but at the time, that was something that was kind of, that was kind of like a hanging threat. Again, we all know what happened there. They did explain it. They did a fine job. They did a perfectly fine job of explaining it as far as I'm concerned. So I just wanted to talk about it. But I didn't know how I felt about this new type of game, where it's basically about wilderness wilderness survival and camouflage and all these new gameplay mechanics and everything else. I didn't really know how I felt about that. I kind of felt that the Metal Gear guys had indeed brought something new to the table each time. Like with Metal Gear 1, they had pretty much defined the stealth platformer. In Metal Gear 2, they added new mechanics like the first-person shooting and the cameras, and the shooting cameras and the stuffing in lockers, which they later brought on to the GameCube remake. But in Metal Gear Solid 3, it looked like it was doing something else entirely, which was, I didn't really know how I felt about it, because what I wanted was to know what was going to be going on at the end of Metal Gear Solid 2. I wanted to play that game. And it looked like that this game was going to be some kind of side story, and I didn't really know how I felt about that. So the first E3 I ever attended was E3 2003, where they had showed the first trailer for it. And on some of these PlayStation demo kiosks, they had the trailer looped on them. And be perfectly honest, I didn't really like that trailer that much. The E3 2003 trailer, I wasn't a big fan of. It kind of was mostly like a rip on Grand Theft Auto. I thought it was too silly. It showed some of the kind of generic gameplay and stuff like that, which I wasn't interested in. Really didn't see. I couldn't really tell much what was going on with the story and stuff like that. So it wasn't really that engrossing. And basically, from what I could tell, obviously the whole GTA bit and those jokes there. I mean, I understand Kojima's got a sense of humor, and I certainly applaud him for that. But for a trailer, it didn't really work too well for me, and it didn't really get my interest. A year later, however, they had another showing at E3 2004, which I also attended. That was the last E3 I had attended for many, many, many years. And I got to go into E3 2004, and Konami had that place. Oh my God. They had prime real estate. at E3 that year. Huge big screen showing what they had, and they had shown the 2004 Metal Gear Solid 3 trailer. And that, as far as I'm concerned, was right up there with Metal Gear Solid 2's 2000 trailer. That was a very well done trailer. How well done was it? Even at the show. I mean, they had built this really big screen television that they had hung up over the system. You could see it the second you walked into the E3 booth, the hall. You could see it absolutely that second. People would stop and watch whenever that trailer showed on that screen. They wouldn't know about the times or anything like that, but every time that trailer showed, a crowd would just form in the hallways. So much so that the security guards had to tell people to move because they were clogging up the entrances, because the booth was right when you came into the hall. I believe they were in the South Hall that year. And you couldn't get in, you couldn't walk through the throughways because there were so many people who were just stopped to watch the Metal Gear Solid 3 trailer that year. It got a huge applause every time the trailer ended. And nobody gave it. These were just trailers. People loved this trailer. I loved this trailer. But also what was so cool was more than they were just showing that trailer, they were also showing the trailer for Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes for the GameCube, which, yeah, I'll totally give them that. They were showing that for the GameCube too. That did get some applause also. But, of course, that's a remake of Metal Gear Solid 1. People had already played that game. They knew what the story was and everything else. But they also had, at the Konami booth, they were demoing. They had demos of Metal Gear Solid 3. They had those set up. They had demo kiosks. And I think I heard that year later on after the event had ended, somebody had ended up stealing one of those demos. Like somebody had had broken into a case or something like that, actually stole one of those demos. Now Konami said it's like, those demos aren't going to work because those were for test systems and they only worked on test systems or something like that. So they weren't super concerned, except for maybe theft or piracy kind of concerns or things like that. But that never really happened, as far as I could tell. I don't think that ever leaked online. I think somebody who bought it or stole it didn't know what they had. They did know what they had, but they didn't have the. I don't think they ever had the chance to run it, and they certainly weren't going to come forward and say, "Can somebody crack this for me?" or something like that, because they would have given themselves away. So I'm sure somewhere some thief has got one of those discs, like on a shelf somewhere collecting dust because they could never run it. But that demo was the first time I played the opening bit of that demo. And let me tell you something. Granted, okay, the demo that I had played was basically the very opening of the game. It was pretty much intact. The game was coming out later that year. This was 2004. The game was pretty close to being released. So the demo that I played was pretty much final for that area. It was pretty much final code. It felt like final code, at least as far as I remember. I've played through the game a few times. What I played then, was pretty identical to what I played now. And I got to see the opening cinematic to Metal Gear Solid 3 for the first time because they kept that whole opening intact. The Halo jump, the plane jump, the sunrise sequence, Zero saying, "Spread your wings and fly, God be with you." I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought that was like one of the greatest openings ever. I'm like, they did it again. Konami did it again. Kojima did it again. They made another great opening. They hooked me. And I remember, actually, no, I take it back. They did actually cut out the briefing, because if you actually do play the game itself, it does a flashback to the briefing, which is later unlockable. You can just watch it later on. But at the time, I thought that was just opening. I thought that opening was just amazing. It was beautiful, and by that point, of course, we know that the PS2 was just starting to show its age. I remember when I got the game finally, some people were saying that the graphics weren't that good. Well, it was a PS2. What do you expect? But I still loved it. I still absolutely loved it. And I certainly remember that years later, or years later, well, actually later in that year, I did actually get a PlayStation 2 finally, just so I could play that game and a few others. But one of the particular games I had to play was Metal Gear 3. And I picked it up right after my birthday just for that. I wanted to find Metal Gear Solid 2. God, did I want to find Metal Gear Solid 2, but I couldn't find anyone selling it at all. The Subsistence version had already since passed. I should say they hadn't released the Subsistence version yet of Metal Gear Solid 3 yet. But they had released, but Metal Gear Solid 2 had come out, Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance had come out. I couldn't find any copies of Metal Gear Substance on any platform. What I wanted it for was the PS2 edition, but I could not find it anywhere. By that point, it had since pretty much sold out everywhere, and they either weren't reprinting it. What I also would have liked to have found was a document of Metal Gear Solid 2, but there was no chance of me finding that anywhere. And so I picked up Metal Gear Solid 3. I think I later bought a copy off my cousin. I think I bought my cousin's copy for Metal Gear Solid 2. I think that's what I ended up doing. Also, interesting tidbit. After all those years, my PS1 memory card still worked. All the data on it completely intact. And this was coming from even back in the day. People were telling me stuff like their memory cards would erase themselves for no reason in the middle of gameplay or something. Yeah, not actual Sony memory cards, as far as I could tell. Original Sony memory cards, PS1 memory cards, never erase themselves. Maybe if you exposed them to magnet, I have no idea what would be the circumstances in which they would erase themselves. But I kept that thing on a shelf where it collected dust for a good 5 years. And when I popped it into my PS2, my brand new PS2 for the first time it had ever been used in a year since I had sold my PS1. Every single save file, every single Metal Gear Unlock I had, the 100% that I had gotten in Metal Gear Solid VR missions, every single thing was still intact. Every file. So I pick up Metal Gear Solid 3, and not too long after I have it and I played through it, I find out that they're re-releasing Metal Gear Solid 3 with pretty much all the features I wanted it to have in the first place. Like, in particular, the demo theater stuff and stuff like that. So I could see all the cutscenes, and because the cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid 3 were just fantastic. So they announced that there's going to be, they're basically going to substance that Metal Gear Solid 3 just like they had done with Metal Gear Solid 2, except they were going to be calling it the Subsistence version of Metal Gear Solid 3. And it was going to be a 2-disc set with some new features and a special bonus disc and everything else. And not too long after they make that announcement, they also announced that they're going to be doing a special 3-disc set for like a $10 premium. I think it was like $50 at the time. Because I think the Subsistence version was only about $40, but I could have been wrong. It might have been $30, $40 as opposed to $40, $50. I don't remember. And it was going to be released on the same day that Metal Gear Acid 2 was going to be released for the PlayStation Portable, or just around that time. The cool thing about that was that they were announcing that there was going to be connectivity between Acid 2 and Subsistence. And just some cool features. Like, for the most part, they could, developers could have gotten away with doing all kinds of PSP to PS2 connectivity stuff even back then, but nobody made use of it, really. It very rarely was used. At least as far as I can remember. The PS2 shipped with 2 USB ports. For the most part, I saw very little use for either of them. I think at one point some kind of audio company had made a stereo receiver that ran off the USB, it could have been a surround receiver. But I can't honestly think of that many uses for those front USB panels. The controllers used something different, so it wasn't for controllers. It did work for Rock Band. Rock Band's worked. So I think that, if USB microphones for Rock Band. So I guess Rock Band would have made use of it. So moving on, basically there was this huge thing going on where they were promising to have this special bonus disc that was going to be available to anybody that pre-ordered the game, the Subsistence game. And it was going to be this huge Metal Gear collection disc and everything else, and it was going to be super important, super cool. And they're really pegging this as important. and I pre-ordered way in advance, and I never got one. I never got one of those discs. I was pissed. I was really pissed. I got screwed out of that. I think I had done it. I think honestly what I had done was I think I had pre-ordered too early. Now that saved me because those special subsistence collections, like those 3-disc set subsistence games, those were like maybe one game a store basically, and those sold out immediately. I mean, I don't think that anybody was selling them. I think they only sold in GameStops too. So they were super, 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 super rare. They did not make too many of those, and I was lucky. I was able to get that as pre-ordered as early as I did. That's just a little bit of a tidbit for you guys. Obviously, those games all shipped. The guy to make me feel better, the clerk, he actually did something kind of nice for me. He gave me instead, because they had no more Metal Gear discs, he went into the back and he pulled out this lithograph that was made. It was designed for pre-orders for Metal Gear Acid 2. It was of the Metal Gear. It was a nice little lithograph that he gave me, and he said, "Here, take this. I know it's not the disc, but you know what? You know, take this instead as a pre-ordered incentive." And he gave it to me with the game, and I thought, wow, it's a cool looking lithograph, and I'm sure that as you guys are listening to this podcast, at one point I probably cycled through a picture of it in my collection. So if you see a lithograph of one Metal Gear, that's where that came from. But I'm getting a little bit too ahead of myself. The cool things about the Subsistence version were the big innovation where everybody really wanted was the third-person perspective gameplay. I really didn't care too much for that. I thought Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, and even Metal Gear Solid 1 worked well with the camera system the way it was, and the cool features about that. I really didn't need third person. I usually have that turned off whenever I play Metal Gear Solid 3. But the cool features that they did have was they had some of the technical demo theaters and stuff like that about some of the joke videos that they had done online, which was really cool. They had Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2 on there, which were released for the MSX. They did not include an NES version, which is considered to be terrible. A lot of people really did not like the NES version of the original Metal Gear, and Kojima has since disavowed that. The Western audience did not get a very good port of that on the NES, they said. It didn't even have the Metal Gear in it. I think they cut the Metal Gear. So, that all aside, one of the things that was included with the Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence version, all versions of that, on the second disc was the demo theater. I'm sorry, the Metal Gear Solid 4 trailer, which was included in the joke demo theater because it was kind of a joke. They had announced that there was going to be a Metal Gear Solid 4 for the PS3, and they first announced it by basically showing using the Metal Gear Solid 3 engine on the PS2 hardware to do a joke little trailer for it. It was really silly. It was really goofy. It's probably just Kojima's sense of humor in place. But the whole joke was that who was going to be the main character of this? Who was going to be the director of this? And Kojima's name was on it, but there were other directors in there, none of which actually did take final credit for the game itself. Well, probably some of the producers, of course, but not the. Because development had constantly been changing hands, and this usually happens at Kojima team. Basically, Kojima retires after every game, and then he comes back and does another game. Basically, it always happens. It's like, oh, this is going to be my last, and then he does another one, and this is going to be my last, and then he does another one. He's been doing that since Metal Gear Solid 2. And the guy just keeps I think it's just because he loves it. There's two things. One, he loves it, and two, he's good at it. So, you know what? Bless you, Kojima. Keep doing it for as long as you humanly can. Until your body gives out or something. Please keep making games. Please. I mean, I can tell that you did it because you're the best at it and you love it, okay? We understand that. We respect that. Keep making games. We love playing them. Or at least I do. So, continuing on. That teaser basically showed really nothing other than the fact that the big joke was Raiden was not going to be the main character. That was like the big joke of it. Is Raiden going to be the main character of this new game? No, it's going to be Snake. But it was funny, and if you have like the Subsistence disc, you can probably the second disc, you can just look that up, or you can just find it online or something, because this was a funny thing. However, the first time we actually did see actual Metal Gear Solid 4 footage, nobody believed it was actual Metal Gear Solid 4 footage. It was just too good looking. Everyone looked at that technology, and by that point, the PS3 had not yet been released. Although maybe the Xbox 360 had been released. I don't remember. I think this was at TGS 05, if I remember correctly. It had been shown by the time that I know for a fact it had been shown by the time Subsistence was released because the bonus disc, the third bonus disc actually did include that trailer with it. Nobody believed that that was a real in-engine system. And then again, the same people said the same thing when Metal Gear Solid 2 came out. Or I should say the first Metal Gear Solid 2 trailer came out. Nobody believed. It looked too good. It was like, oh, that's pre-rendered, or oh, that's not what the hardware could do. It's not possible. You've got like major workstations or something like that putting it together. No. That was just their capabilities with their graphical power and what basically pushing the limits of what the system that they had gotten could do. And it looked phenomenal. So Metal Gear Solid 4 information starts to hit the internet. Looks really, really cool. Everyone's looking forward to it. The first trailer, everybody's saying, "Oh no, that's not pre-rendered stuff." And I think that what really happened was within the next year, by 2006, a lot of websites and everything else started to go to high definition, basically broadcasts and streams and stuff like that. So they started releasing the videos. At that point, nowadays, everybody pretty much does a high definition video. But at the time, let me tell you, I mean, most computers at the time could not support high definition video at all. Nowadays, well, the really cheap ones still can't, but you get the gist of it. It's like nowadays, pretty much high definition broadcasts are everywhere. But at the time, this was like something that was only the high end stuff could actually have a high definition broadcast. And what was really cool was that it looked phenomenal. Like you could really tell the grit in the dirt. And you could really tell the realism. Now, of course, nowadays the game's out, so people do know how good it looks. But at the time, that was just something that was very special. It blew a lot of other games out of the water, especially, and really showed off for the first time what the PlayStation 3 was really, really capable of. I know Killzone, people were talking about that too. But this was I thought this was even bigger than Killzone. And it was just awesome to watch it and to hear what was going on with the synopsis. For me, I don't think that I really got interested in it. Well, I was always interested, but what really made it interesting to me was when the director's cut video after E3 came out. I think this was after E3 2006. They released like a 12-minute trailer as opposed to E3's 10-minute trailer, because that finally showed what the story was. And that was really impressive, actually. That was really impressive trailer, and we got to see. And then I was really interested in playing the game. When the price drop happened for the PlayStation 3, when they finally dropped the price to $500 as opposed to $600, I was the first to pick it up, and I picked it up that summer. I was working, and I was very, I picked up a few games, Resistance and stuff like that. But what I was really looking forward to was Metal Gear Solid 4. Fast forward about a couple months after that, the first E4All was happening. Now, for those of you who don't know any of the backgrounds going on, after 2006, E3 decided that they were going to do a smaller showing as opposed to the big major showing that they had at the time. The ones that had been successful. They wanted to do something smaller with just pre-press showings and no major convention anymore. And it was very controversial because they thought, oh, it was, this was designed for business. It was, but it had become a glitz and glamour kind of thing. And they said that the suits were complaining, and they wanted to listen to the suits. So this other company showed up, I don't remember what they were called, that wanted to do their own version of E3. And it was going to be in October, but at the same place. And their whole idea was that they wanted to open it up to the public. They were going to make it like E3, except they were going to open it up to the public. And I hadn't been to an E3 in a couple of years, and I figured, oh, it's open to the public now. I should go to Los Angeles for the time, and I should go check it out. Well, I went. I got my ticket. I went with a friend. I went with the unknown cameraman, and it was stupid. Oh God, it was nothing like E3. I mean, I've gone to E3s before then. I've been to E3 since, and this was not E3. I mean, it was one hall. It wasn't filled up. There wasn't a lot of people. You could see pretty much everything in like a day, which is all right, but they charged over $100 for a 3-day pass, which was outrageous, which was freaking highway robbery. I mean, I think the PAX people were really mad about that. But one of the only successful things to come out of that I won't call it E3, it's E4 basically, as far as I'm concerned, E4 all. One of the successful things to come out of the E4 all, one of the enjoyable moments of the E4 all, was the fact that they actually had Metal Gear Solid 4 playable there. Konami team had shown up, they had demo units set up, they had the line from the beginning of the day to the end of the day completely swamped. So they brought us in to these rooms, and this little booth that they had set up, and they were showing off. I think they were showing off Metal Gear Solid 4. They had the E3. No, they actually, I think it was still E3 preview. They had done one, but they had also shown off some other stuff. This was '07. The DualShock had just come out. And the DualShock 3 had just come out, or was just about to come out. And they said they were going to have DualShock support, which was a big thing at the time. They still didn't have trophy support. Trophy support wasn't even talked about back then. So that's why, in case you guys are curious, this came out before trophy support. So they led us into these little rooms that they had set up, and Ryan Payton and some of the other Kojima team members that had come to the United States basically demoed for us for like about 10 minutes, trained us on how to play the game. They had a bunch of 6-axis controllers they were passing around just to show us how the octo-camo system worked and how to make use of it. All these cool features about that kind of stuff that they were using. And they really went in depth about how to play the game for about 10 minutes. Then, after the 10 minutes were up, they let us outside to actually be able to play the game ourselves. Now, we didn't have very much time to play the game. Basically, anybody that was in the demo basically had two options. You either could have watched the cutscenes that were shown, or you could play the game. You wouldn't have had time for both. Now, I decided to do both. I watched about half the cutscenes and I played about half the demo. I didn't get very far before Ryan Payton asked me to go. But he did ask where seemed to be a nice guy, and he did answer one of my questions, which was what the resolution of the televisions that they were using were, at least for the demo units. And he told me they were about at 1080i at the time, which impressed me since like 99.9% of the games that were coming out for the PlayStation 3 were all 720. There were very few 1080p games, and the PlayStations weren't upsampling basically, so it was not, it was good to hear that at least, because I had a new 1080i television that I wanted to make use of, and of course the final version, as you know, will upsample the 1080p. That it will, but at the time I was happy with that. The televisions that they did demo the game on, at least the ones that we used, were pretty terrible. The picture quality wasn't very good on them, even if they were 1080i, but I had seen some of the footage on a good screen, and it looked pretty good to me, so I was pretty happy. Also, the controls were fluid, fantastic. I was fairly happy with it, and the game was still probably less than a year away from release, but it was still quite a whiles away. So, from what I got to see, I was pretty impressed with it. In case anybody curious what they showed, they pretty much showed us up to pretty much around the scene in the very beginning where the Metal Gear shows up, which is the Otacon's little project, the Metal Gear Mark II. Pretty much all the scenes around that area in the first act of the game. That's what we got to see. We got to use the octo-camo mechanics. We got to stealthily around. We got to play against the PMCs and try to get the other countries' rebels on our side, stuff like that. Pretty much all those levels did appear to be still intact, so I thought that was kind of cool. Overall, I was fairly pleased that I got to see it, and I was pretty happy. I'm like, give me the game, man. So the next year it does come out. There is a collector's edition. There was a collector's edition released for it, which I had to buy. I just had to buy it. Included a Blu-ray commentary collector's disc on it. It had two behind-the-scenes documentaries on it, one of which was basically, as far as I was concerned, just a fluff piece. It was pretty long. It was a fluff piece. I didn't like it very much. But one was actually really good. They had a 40-minute documentary on it that was basically about Kojima's team as the final weeks of them working on the game itself. That was really good, actually. I really liked that. That's, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best documentaries ever made. At least for video games. So obviously, for other stuff, you could say, oh, whatever Ken Burns made was probably better. But Ken Burns never made a documentary about video games, just Star Wars, as far as I'm concerned, is how. I think that was the nerdiest he ever got. But by all means, Ken Burns, do something about the video games industry. We really could use it. They also did the Metal Gear Online beta. For pre-orders, they did a Volume 2 disc, which I was able to get for the pre-order discs because those were being given away with DLC codes for Metal Gear the Online beta, which was pretty cool. And so after that, we played that. That was very conclusive. I enjoyed the game quite a bit, although I thought the installation footprint was kind of big. I keep having to delete it every time I'm done using it because it just takes up too much memory in my PS3's hard drive. Like I think final version of it, last time I checked was over 8 gigs. That's quite a bit. So I've had to keep deleting it. But that's with all the downloads and everything and updates for Metal Gear Online. But what I did find really interesting was, of course, that how conclusive that they had made it. So they tied up everything in a nice little bow, and I enjoyed it. I especially enjoyed some of the scene at the end of Act 3 or around Act 3. I really enjoyed the second half of Act 3. I also enjoyed Act 4. I mean, going back to Shadow Moses, that was really fun. I think they went, and I liked how Act 5 opened up. That was very Jerry Bruckheimer-esque. I mean, I hate Jerry Bruckheimer and his movies, but you could tell that they did it better than him, and I like that a lot. They were trying to be him, but they surpassed him because they actually, by that point, they'd actually cared about you cared about the characters. So all this action actually does work if you actually care about the characters that you're watching do this tense scene. And Jerry Bruckheimer, you just don't give a shit about the characters. So who gives a fuck how cool the visuals are? It's like you don't give a shit about the story. There's no tension. But that's my end about that. As for the nice little cherry on the cake of the whole Metal Gear story about how it concluded, at least for my life, I know that there is a Metal Gear Rising coming out. It was announced at E309, and then E3 did come back. It was also shown at E310. I did not see it at E311. I was at E311. I did not see anything. They did show, in case you're curious what Konami did show at E311, it was basically, they showed Metal Gear Solid 3 3D. Which kind of, to me, felt a little bit nice, because the last E3 I had been to, they had shown Metal Gear 3 when it first came out, and now I'm seeing the Metal Gear 3 3D for the 3DS. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That kind of a coming back kind of thing. But I was in emails. They were not showing anything like Metal Gear Rising or anything like that at least at E3 this year. And there's some talk about what's going on with that project. But the nice little cherry on the cake was a couple years ago, I went to New York for the first time in years. And I went with a friend because we were going to go see a movie that was only being shown in New York. And as we went there, I said, I wanted to see New York, but I wanted to see, like, not the stuff that I normally would see in New York. Like, I wanted to see, you go to New York, you see the first things. You see the World Trade Center, you see, you see the, maybe Central Park, you see the Statue of Liberty. All that stuff didn't interest me, because I'd already seen it before. What I wanted to see, actually, was Federal Hall, for the obvious reasons. So there's a photo of me, and I'll wrap up the video with that photo. I don't know if you're seeing it right now on the screen right now. Standing in front of the statue of George Washington that they have out there in front of the Federal Hall. And it was taken in the middle of the night because that was as soon as we possibly could get over there. Of course, by that point, Wall Street was pretty much vacant. And there's a shot of me, and I had to get this shot of me standing in front of Federal Hall and laughing, just like Solidus had. And I just had to do that. And I if anybody had asked me, because actually not one person said a word. Now, I figured at some point an NYPD detective is like, what the fuck are you doing? But actually, I looked into it, and Federal Hall is considered like a national landmark, and national landmarks take all the pictures. The rules are take all the pictures you want of them. It's there for your enjoyment. So if you wanted to take a picture of yourself laughing in front of it, they're not going to have any problem with it whatsoever. Nobody gave me a problem. I was just going to say I saw it in a video game, and I had to do it. It's really, as far as I'm concerned, no different. What I did was really no different than some of the people that have to go in front of a boat and just to stand there. But as far as I was concerned, mine was coming from a much better place, a much better subject matter, and I thought it was much, much cooler. So that was my last Metal Gear memory. And I'm hoping to make some new ones. I really am. Metal Gear HD was pretty good. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I'm really looking forward to Metal Gear Rising. There was some news about that today. So, uh, great. So far, the past 10 years have just been fantastic. And I'm sure there's plenty more Metal Gear to come. So, that's this podcast. I know it's probably gone pretty lengthy, but you know what? I've had to cover 10 years of my life. And it's been a lot of fun. So, this is Maniac with GameAccess.net. And I'll see you guys next time. Over and out.